All righty. I think some people will probably continue to trickle in, but we're going to go ahead and get started because I know this is a really great topic that we don't want to waste any time on this evening. So thank you everybody for joining. Thank you particularly to our Leadership Academy students that are here tonight. This is our fourth webinar in our Collegiate Recovery Leadership Academy student webinar series. That is a mouthful. I don't know if I've ever said that whole line before, but essentially we are here on behalf of Safe Project. And many of you I see on the guest list are very familiar with Safe Project. But for those of you who are new to the organization or aren't familiar with the work that we do, we are a national nonprofit organization, and our mission is to save lives and to otherwise mitigate the impact that addiction has on people around the country. And we do this through a variety of different programs and initiatives. Our four main initiatives are safe communities, safe veterans, safe workplaces, and safe campuses, which is what brings us here today. If you aren't terribly familiar with those other initiatives, I really highly encourage you to take a look at our website because we really are doing a lot of different things around the country. But like I said, we are here on behalf of our Safe Campuses initiative, and in particular, the Collegiate Recovery Leadership Academy. And that is a program that often goes by the acronym CRLA. That's less of a mouthful. So if you hear that acronym kind of being thrown around tonight or within the presentation, that's what we're referring to. And what the CRLA is a national fellowship program for students who are in recovery as well as recovery allies. And this is a program that students apply to throughout the summer. And if they're accepted into the program, it's an academic year-long fellowship where they receive mentorship, they receive scholarships to go to a couple of different leadership events. They do a project on their campus that has an impact on collegiate recovery in some way. And then they also participate in this webinar series that is designed and created for students. We open it up to the public because we really want this information to be available to everybody. This is really great content, and we're really excited specifically about this topic, about the recovery movement and what the role of collegiate recovery and students' role is in all of this. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to our presenters tonight, Kristen, Harper, and Matt Patterson. Kristen really is a trailblazer in this space, and Matt is one of our very own who actually was part of the Leadership Academy and now is a part-time employee at Safe Project. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to you guys.
Awesome. Thanks, Hannah. Like Hannah said, my name is Matt. I am student voice liaison for Safe Project and a member of last year's cohort. I'm also a Master of Social Work student at Florida Atlantic University, hopefully graduating in 2 weeks. So there's that. And presenting with me tonight is Kristen Harper. Kristen has been working in the recovery field since 2008 when she founded a collegiate recovery program in Georgia. She has gone on to have many different roles, but tonight she is going to be sharing her experience with advocacy and community organizing. Hey, Kristen.
Hey, Matt. Hey, everybody. Great to be with y'all tonight.
All right, so topics for today. First, we're going to just dive into a little bit about what recovery is, then discuss some multiple pathways, the recovery movement, and then the role of stigma and how it plays out in advocacy. Oh, wrong way. All right. So what is recovery? I wanted to give you guys an opportunity to put in the chat any ideas you had. I know we've all heard different definitions. So I want to hear from you. But while you do that, I was going to share with you some different recovery definitions throughout the years from different organizations. Like back in 2005, the Center for Substance Use Treatment, CSAT, they describe recovery as recovery from alcohol and drug problems is a process of change through which an individual achieves abstinence and improved health, wellness, and quality of life. There's a few other ones that are pretty interesting, like the Scottish government, you have to say it like that, says a process through which an individual is enabled to move on from their problem drug use towards a drug-free life as an active and contributing member of society. And then the one that is actually kind of controversial sometimes is down here from CCAR, which is the Connecticut Community for Addiction Recovery. And their definition is simply when someone when is someone in recovery? When they say they are. And I wanted to know what everybody thought about that too in the chat. We've been having some recovery is gaining back a complete sense of who I am from the inside out, creating a healthy lifestyle by changing self-harming behavior. Recovery is healing. I like that. Cool. And then the most up-to-date kind of definition that we like to use at SAFE comes from SAMHSA, the working definition, which is simply a process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live a self-directed life, and strive to reach their full potential. And the reason I like that one so much is it doesn't actually even state anything about substances in there. It's all about change and working towards a more self-directed life. So recovery has become an expansive term that includes many different behavioral and mental health disorders, not just substance use disorders. And there's pros and cons to that. So like, what's your opinion? One thing that comes to mind is that, you know, there has to be a space for people with, you know, in recovery from substances, right? And how does that play out into the recovery movement? And we're going to get into that a little bit more in a second. So here's Kristen.
Yeah, Matt, I love some of the comments that are coming in the chat. This is, you know, an ongoing conversation. I think when we talk about the recovery movement, I actually really prefer to call it just kind of a community of those invested in recovery, because movement sort of infers that we're like moving towards a goal. And I think some parts of our work, we're still trying to define what those goals are. And this conversation really plays into that. Some of the research that's been coming up in the past like 10, 15 years or so is leading towards this concept of recovery capital. And recovery capital, basically all it is internal assets and external community assets that help an individual sustain their recovery, however they define that recovery. And so this slide really kind of represents that individualized and then also having access to many pathways. And of course, we all know that there's a difference between multiple pathways to recovery and then multiple pathways for recovery and multiple pathways of recovery. And I know that seems a little bit nitpicky, but I think all of that plays into this conversation because my pathway to recovery was really kind of individual self sort of identified that I needed help and support. I actually didn't access treatment. I didn't go through the justice or, you know, incarceration process. So I accessed my recovery through community recovery supports that were free and available to me, thankfully, here in Georgia. I'm in recovery for a substance use disorder, an eating disorder, and mental health disorders, obsessive compulsive disorder, anxiety, and depression. And my pathways of recovery have been many. So, you know, active lifestyle, health, nutrition, therapy, definitely 12-step, mutual aid, and family-based and faith-based as well. And so I think that some of that kind of plays into this conversation as well. What does it mean to you, Matt?
Yeah, that's changed a lot over the years. A little bit about my story, like, you know, me too, when I came into recovery, there was only one way to do it. I went to a treatment center and they took us out to meetings. And then it was actually through the Collegiate Recovery Leadership Academy that I met students from around the country. Some of them had never even been to a treatment center. And in my experience, if you hadn't been to prison, you hadn't been in, you know, why even stop? But I had to really get outside of myself and, you know, separate my own personal recovery journey and story from the recovery movement. And it really helped to broaden my character. I like how you said that it's very individualized. You know, and that was one of the things that getting involved with Safe Project did for me is that I thought I was open-minded until I found out I wasn't.
Right.
So, and you mentioned community too, and that jumps into the next slide here where, you know, over 22 million people self-identify as being in recovery. And then on the slide after that, it states that research shows that community is crucial to this. And I mean, that's more than just, you talked about recovery capital a second ago, And in social work, we like to talk about building up protective
Mhm.
factors and minimizing risk factors. And then in 12 step, they talk about insurance against that next slip, going to groups and mutual aid groups and joining the CRC. Even on those days, I don't feel like I have a problem anymore. I don't feel, it's about you're either growing or you're going, focusing on the solution. So like community is crucial. It really is. And some of the things that come to my mind are, there was that YouTube by Johan Hari, where he stated that I use this quote all the time in papers, and the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it is human connection. Because addiction's isolating. It becomes the one thing that takes over everything, and I cut everybody out of my life. And then there's all those sayings too that I hear in the rooms, like try to relate in, not compare out, or you're not alone. And then Irvin Yalom, one of my favorite psychotherapists, he always talks about this concept of universality, because in the education world, they want to quantify everything that happens in group therapy and then study it. And he simply calls universality as this feeling that we are all in the same boat. So if that boat goes down, we go down together. That's how I like to think of it. Or we can swim together. So what about you, Kristen?
Yeah, absolutely. All of those quotes, that one about the opposite of addiction is human connection, and applying that to the recovery capital lens, I think makes a lot of sense. Just as, as a scientist who's been in the work for a while, that I'm not really sure if we go far enough with that quote, right? So it's not just human connection to other humans, but it's connection to purpose, it's connection to safe and affordable housing, it's connection to possible employment, education, for sure. Speaking to a bunch of students, that's critical. And so I think that you're absolutely right, that I know in my own active substance use, it was very isolating, and it was isolating from not only from individuals and from people, but also from goals and from, I really thought that I was not going to even live past the age 23. And so to even consider finishing college or, holding down a job that, didn't require me to wear a hairnet, because that's all really, waitressing and food service, and which there's nothing wrong with that. But, I did have this like sneaking suspicion that I was missing out on something, and I just didn't think that I could do it. And so getting into recovery has connected me to all these various resources so that it could tap into some of that recovery capital.
That purpose, definitely. Purpose is very important. I was just thinking, I've been in school since my 53rd day of treatment, and it's about to come to an end in May. And
Wow.
I'm having a little bit of a crisis, but it's okay. We'll get through this together.
That's right.
So we often hear that addiction doesn't discriminate, but research indicates that formal recovery supports do. So we create these spaces with the best of intentions, but then some people end up getting left out. And why is that? So let's talk about pathways. Let's see. What's your experience with multiple pathways and as far as advocacy and the recovery movement goes?
Yeah. So if we're talking about pathways to recovery, I think there's been an obvious discriminatory practice within some of the larger systems, just in society as a whole. We've definitely, just in the collegiate recovery research that we've done over the past several years, it's been predominantly Caucasian, predominantly male, those that identify as male. And we're seeing some advocacy work around really trying to expand access, not just access to treatment, but access to community-based recovery supports. So hopefully it can become more equitable. But this is where I get really excited about advocacy, because there's so much opportunity to intersect with other social justice groups. And we'll talk about a little bit more about that in a little bit. But pathways kind of infers that there's also gatekeepers, right, to these pathways. And I think that that's something we need to talk about, is who's holding the power to some of these paths. And then, of course, pathways of recovery is a little bit more inclusive. because, you have different types of recovery that's starting to emerge more and more. Smart recovery, some of the ones we listed earlier, mutual aid, yoga, active lifestyle, natural recovery. But I think that there's still a stigma attached to every single one of those pathways that we also need to really address and kind of unpack. Is, some people feel that 12-step is very dogmatic. Let's talk about that. Let's unpack that. Some people don't really understand medication assisted recovery. Let's unpack that, and let's really, sit down with folks that have lived experience in all of these different pathways. But yeah, it can be pretty exclusive, unfortunately, depending on who has the power, who's the gatekeeper, and where are we funneling individuals.
Absolutely. I can tell as this goes on, this gets more and more complicated. I think they gave this one to us for a reason.
Yeah. I mean, it's human, right? Like, humans are complicated. And I think systems are extremely complicated because humans created them. So, and that's what we're talking about here, is really kind of tearing down systems.
Definitely. So when it comes to some different like recovery pathways of recovery, I always think of the support groups. And you've got your obvious like the AA, NA, CA, CMA, but then there's some like newer ones like Smart Recovery. I use Smart Recovery as an adjunct to my recovery. It's all about making better decisions, and I was making poor decisions. So that cost benefit analysis list that has come in very handy. And I also like the fact that at certain meetings with Smart Recovery, you could talk to each other. Crosstalk is encouraged. So that was a unique thing. Then Collegiate Recovery, has all recovery meetings. Then there's the M&M there. That's moderation management. And then there's Recovery Dharma on there, Refuge Recovery, Wellbriety movement. Some of these I wasn't even aware of. I didn't even know about. So, but they all fall under that umbrella term of recovery. And who am I to say if somebody isn't in recovery? Because I wanted to point out, like, some of these aren't abstinence based, like moderation management or Smart Recovery. And I always say I always hear it said, there's my business and none of my business. What other people are doing or what they're saying about me is really none of my business. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I think the other thing too, just, looking at the Wellbriety logo here, I heard the founder of Wellbriety, of White Bison, Don Koya, speak a couple of years ago. And he really talked about the inclusiveness of recovery, also from the evolution of the individual recovery process. And I have found that to be really true. I started my recovery process at 19 back in 1999. I'm that old. But I established an abstinence date in 2001. And since then, I found at different sort of phases of the evolution of my recovery, I've needed different types of recovery resources. And so I think I was scared initially to even consider like going outside my traditional 12-step bubble, right? Because we were sort of like, oh, that's scary, like I can't step out, like I'm going to lose something. And all that it's done is really enhance my recovery. And I've found some other 12-steppers that they've had the same experience. And so it's not leaving one for something else, but it's just being more inclusive. And Wellbriety talks about the different kind of cycles, if you will, or seasons of recovery for the long haul. And I think that that's something else that's really interesting when we talk about the recovery movement, is there are some people that maybe would have identified as being in recovery early on in the process, but maybe 10, 15, 20, 30 years, they feel like they've sort of outgrown a recovery process. And so I think that population is also really interesting to kind of consider, how do we welcome them back in and make this more of an inclusive community?
That was a great answer, because it leads right into our next slide. How do we balance inclusion with safety and navigating fear in these conversations? Because I know this comes up a lot with collegiate recovery communities and with medication management and with harm reduction. And what about, when we're so inclusive, are we putting our own recovery at risk? And like, I have two like personal examples of how my viewpoint changed on that. Like you said, it's a growing kind of thing. It's my recovery journey is like a recovery movement of its own. It gets bigger and more expansive. And I know that there were certain things like when it came to harm reduction, I can support. I think my way of navigating fear was always to be 100% honest, and not like honest with myself on my limitations and what I could handle at that moment. So I think we call it having smart feet. I know when to walk away from a situation. So sometimes my feet are smarter than my head, and it's definitely more than my mouth. But you know, I think of, we have a needle exchange in Palm Beach County, and I support that 100%. I know harm reduction saves lives, and I know that needle exchanges reduce the spread of diseases. Now, knowing that, I can academically support that and advocate for that, but I also know that personally, I'm not at the point yet where I want to hold syringes. I just don't. You know, and there's nothing wrong with that. You know, that's my choice. And then I also think about in the community sense of a collegiate recovery community, we voted at my CRC at FAU to be as inclusive and expansive as possible, to allow anybody that says they're in recovery to come in and to talk about whatever they'd like at our all recovery meetings. And how that worked out is like, I've never felt uncomfortable or triggered by that. But if I did, I would lean more into my own personal recovery outside. You know, we're very saturated with recovery in the Boca Raton, Delray area. I think they call us the recovery capital of the world or the relapse capital of the world, one of the two. But yeah, so I could throw a rock in any direction and hit any type of meeting. So I leaned into that. And then, you know, so collegiate recovery turned more into an advocacy avenue for me and an activism kind of thing, which was great, like a voice on campus to fight stigma. Now, the conversation shifts if collegiate recovery, if that is your primary pathway, then I can't speak on that because that's not the space I occupy. So what about you, Kristen, and your CRC experience and advocacy?
Yeah, this is another really great complex topic as well. And I kind of, over the years, through personal experience of being somebody in recovery, additionally as personal experience of running collegiate recovery programs, and then also working with, I don't know, like over 200 campuses at this point on implementing collegiate recovery services, I have found exactly what you're talking about is going back to the community values and the goals of the community and really checking in with students on kind of their philosophy to this. And the campuses that have been really successful of being more inclusive have been those that have really, really included student voice and have constantly checked in with students about, you know, what are our community values? What are we, what's our philosophical approach to recovery? This exact conversation, how do we define recovery as a community? How do we define our services as a collegiate recovery program versus cultivating community within our student population? And so after all of that has been discussed, you know, I think that it really boils down to people needing to feel safe. And I think that the community can be inclusive and embrace a wide variety of philosophical approaches to recovery and harm reduction versus the space, right? So the space is held on a higher education campus. And I'm sure that y'all all know this, that universities have policies and procedures and like rules and red tape and stuff. Yeah. And so the community can have this philosophical approach, but the space potentially may bump up against that. And that's where some advocacy, when we're going to talk about it in just a couple of minutes, about where collegiate recovery students and staff can help with advocacy efforts, is when it comes to that space and that red tape and that institutional structure that often gets in the way of being more inclusive. At the community level, I'll say this and then hush. I know personally for myself, and I don't know if you've experienced this, Matt, early on, like when I was about 8 years into my abstinence-based process, to maybe 10 years, I had just started this program here in Georgia, this collegiate recovery program, and I was very dogmatic about abstinence-based recovery And a lot of it was fear-based for me. A lot of it was, exactly what you're saying about you weren't comfortable holding syringes. I wasn't comfortable being around anybody that displayed being under the influence. And over the years, the more I was exposed to research, the more communities I worked with, I looked back on my own personal recovery. Harm reduction saved my life. From that time I was 19 to 21, I tried all sorts of moderation. I tried reducing harm by changing different substances I was trying to use. And so when I looked at it under that lens, I was able to come at it from a more compassionate standpoint and understanding. And also, I think I was a little bit more secure in my own personal recovery. And so I think that, again, like going back to that idea of like the evolution of individuals' recovery, I think some people are just in a different place to be able to embrace it, while others maybe are potentially not in that place to be able to feel as safe. And so, again, going back to the community and asking the community to help define the values and the philosophical approach can be really, really helpful to this.
Definitely. Thank you. Oh, so this is more your field than mine. These are just some lists of national organizations that are members of the recovery movement. And you've actually worked at a few of these, right?
Yeah. So, yeah, I've worked either with them or was on the board or as a contractor with all of these folks. And I have to say that everybody's amazing. And I'm actually just about to join SAMHSA in the Center for Substance Abuse Prevention as a grant program officer. So I'm really interested to see what it's like inside the government. But this is a really short list. And I think that that's one of the areas that we've really kind of let down our stakeholders, is that we've limited the recovery movement to just people or organizations that their mission identifies with recovery specifically. And if we go back to that recovery capital conversation or that being connected conversation, we're looking at, housing issues. We're looking at food deserts. We're looking at formerly incarcerated reentry programs. We're looking at educational programs in the community level, prevention. I mean, there's just so many different ways to expand our tent, so to speak. But every single one of these organizations is doing some great work.
I mean, absolutely. That brings us right into our next slide. The recovery movement is expansive. It does not exist in a vacuum. And you see, it goes out to all these different avenues. I know personally, intersectionally, like criminal justice was a huge part that kept me going back out. The idea that I would never be able to get a job. And it dawned on me the other day that I'm about to have a master's degree. I will never be unemployed again. Like, shoot, I mean, knock on wood, like hopefully, but that's something I never thought of. I was used to getting hired at a fast food job, doing very well, getting promoted, and then being fired, because once you hit management, there's a background check. How long until the debt society is paid? And my first go around in recovery, like really giving it a shot, that was one of the things that triggered my relapse. Like I was done. Or my research area of focus is in homelessness. And, large percentage of the people I interview, because I like to get the stakeholder opinion. I like to get photo voice. I like them to take photos and then tell me about them, because it really opens people up. Because you got to remember where that power is on the side of the room, like you were saying earlier. So, I mean, it is all intersectional. So part of being a member of the recovery movement is being a member of, like, what do you say, like social equity movement or the human rights movement. It all connects. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that we're in a really exciting time right now, because I think that the tables and the conversations I've been a part of for the past year or so, this topic is coming up more and more. And so I'm hoping actually your generation and even younger than you, Matt, all the young people that I've talked to as of late, like, y'all get it. Just like there's no, like, you don't even need me. Like, there's no reason for me to even try to explain, because y'all are teaching me at this point. And so I'm really excited about getting out of the way, to be quite honest with you. Because I've been bumping up against kind of the establishment for the past 15 years or so. And then I come and I meet you and the other students and some of the younger voices. And it's like, y'all get it. Like, y'all, do your thing. Like, I'm going to get out of the way. I'm going to go get a government job, and I'm chill. Because we've got to do something different. We have not worked our way out of a job yet, which is an indicator that we're failing a large part of our community. And so, so I'm really excited that y'all are about to hit the scene, so to speak. So I'm glad you're graduating, basically, because we need you.
I'm excited. It's funny you said that, work yourself out of a job, because I was just one of the SAFE board members recently said that at a meeting, was like, that's our goal, is to work ourselves out of a job.
100%. Yeah. And we can go, be farmers or something, right?
I'm down. So what about allies? Like, you can put in the chat what you think. When I think of allies, I got this definition here, and it just states a person who strives to eliminate the injustices and barriers faced by people in or seeking recovery, empowering individuals in their healing journeys, and creating recovery-friendly environments where individuals, families, and communities can thrive. And what I really like was the striving to eliminate injustices, because by that definition, aren't we all recovery allies? Like, even as a person in recovery, I'm either an ally for other people in recovery, or what's changed in my personal recovery is now I'm starting to realize that through harm reduction and other policies like that I can't truly be a recovery ally unless I'm also an ally for people who use drugs.
Right. Absolutely.
And I checked that in my own 12-step background too. And even in the big book, it always states, nobody wants to hear about liquor from somebody who hates it. That doesn't make any sense. I put down my substances, and all of a sudden this gap creates between me and people who are, and then I've got to check myself on these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's all fear-based, right? I mean, it just comes back, and it also comes back to the sense of superiority too. And I think that those of us that have done what, in the 12-step world, have gone on 12-step calls, right, and have sat with people that are under the influence and want to do something different, and then seeing them move into this recovery process for themselves. Like, how do you exclude others, right, who want to do that? And how do I exclude beloved family members that still use drugs and still drink? I love them as humans, and just because they decided to still use drugs, and they're doing it completely fine, right? Like,
yeah,
go for it, right? Like, I'm not going to cut myself off from them.
Am I afraid, or am I jealous? Sometimes.
Exactly.
Just saying, moderation didn't work for me, but that doesn't mean it doesn't work for other people.
Exactly.
As my family members would tell me, if I ever ever thought that they had a drinking problem, is you've made a far worse life for yourself than I have. So
yeah. And just think about how many people we could include in the recovery movement if we quit, coming at it from you must, quit everything before you can join our club mentality. Like, that's not going to bring in allies. That's going to, scare people off and think they're going to think we're a cult, right? Like,
people do think that.
I know. Yeah. And I think it's about, some of the things that students put in the chat here about, being happy and growth and moving forward. I mean, that's anybody. Like, anybody can be a recovery ally.
Absolutely. And then I always think back too with fentanyl and the 100,000 last year, like, whatever works, I say, shoot, come on in.
Yeah.
Right.
The only thing I'll say too, this is like a total kind of 180 with allies. We definitely need allies. We cannot live without allies, for sure. I think one of the things that I have experienced a little bit over the years is some allyship coming from a really, really best intentioned place, but they don't fully give us leadership or decision-making power, or there's this middleman funder that's going to watch the money while we're doing the programming. And so I think some of that is just moving towards fully being integrated into the fabric of the systems. And we're not quite there yet. Right. And so that's saying nothing about us without us. I usually add in nothing about us without us in leadership positions, because, that's kind of the full integration is when we can make decisions on how we're going to spend money and on legislation and policy.
And that's why getting stakeholder or consumer or, their opinion and buy-in, that's like part of my research. I studied students that utilized the homeless tuition waiver in Florida. If you've experienced homelessness, like I did in treatment and in halfway and before that, you could go to school, a state school, and tuition was waived. And that's a policy, that's an allyship. That was a policy meant to help students experiencing homelessness, which are students in recovery. Now, what ended up happening was as soon as I was awarded that and I enrolled in school, I immediately lost my food stamps because you cannot be a college student and receive food stamps at that time in 2019 when I started going to college. And nobody knew that. Like nobody knew that because the people making the policies aren't the people utilizing them, and they don't get feedback, because the people going to the meetings aren't the people utilizing them. So, and it was interesting because I wasn't the only student. It came up in my research a lot. And I was like, luckily over COVID-19, when these intersectional things started to hit more people and rent skyrocketed down here, they fixed that, because enough people, it affected enough people. So, and that's what we're seeing in the recovery movement now too, is it's affecting enough families, enough people that we are starting to get attention. And you're right, we do have to watch who we're getting, who's going to be our ally and what their intentions are. But I'm just one person, Kristen. Can I really make a difference? I like these
Yes.
Well, thanks. Could you elaborate?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many examples. I mean, I'm sure the student impact projects that everybody's working on right now are going well. I was shocked the first time somebody told me that I made a difference. I was 27 when I started the Collegiate Recovery Program. I had no idea what I was doing, and met with the university president. And he was like, "So you're the young lady that's been causing all these issues," And he said it. Obviously, it was like a backhanded, sort of passive aggressive way of giving me a compliment. But I did raise some really interesting conversations on campus just by starting this little program with one office, one computer, and a meeting space. And I think we underestimate the power of one person asking questions. This doesn't make sense to me, or this isn't right. Can somebody explain this to me? And people that hold the power do not like getting questioned. And I think that that was kind of my big aha moment about realizing just how much power one person could have.
Absolutely. And a lot of policy isn't even written down. It's just what people believe in the organization, like that, just the general what we do kind of answer. It's what we've always done. And it's going to be what we only do until people stand up and ask questions. I'm that person on campus too. In social work, we like to say I make good trouble. Like, are you making a ruckus today? Like, I thought everybody just knew me because of my hair, but don't worry, people talk. So let's see.
Yeah, that's a John Lewis quote. He's from here in Georgia, and he's one of my civil rights heroes. And making good trouble is right. Especially when you're talking about health and wellness, it's like a no-brainer, right? Like, it's really, I don't know, we're not killing puppies, you know what I mean? Like, it's actually like a good thing. So
good trouble.
Yeah, exactly. It's good trouble.
We're the opposite of those people.
Exactly.
So this slide here is about stigma. And, when I think of like at a collegiate level or at an individual level, what we all can do to as part of the movement is to attack stigma, because stigma has real consequences. Stigmas are negative beliefs held by people that are generally unfounded, or even if they are founded, are generalized to large groups of people for no reason, like when it shouldn't be. So like stigma affects public policy, political support for treatment policies. It's a barrier to employment or education. I'm a member of Ban the Box, which removes that question about, a convicted felony or an arrest. But, there's the backside to that is they've noticed in states that have done that the employers are more racist afterwards because they're not able to ask about questions. So then there's this like balancing act. I told you we weren't going to get through this without offending some people, because these are tough questions. Like, on the one hand, Ban the Box, it worked out great for me. I was connected to resources. But on the other hand, I stopped filling out my application at least 10 times because of that question. So where do we meet this? You know, policies exist for a reason, but where do we find this middle ground? Where do we find the qualitative research, the actual stories? So you've got more experience in the policy wise than I do though, right?
Maybe, I don't know. And I say that because I sort of stumbled into policy work, and this past year really got into it at the federal level, and exactly what you're talking about. The other kind of layer when you get into this sort of, you know, civil rights, human rights sort of reform, is you do have to figure in politics, right, at that level. And everybody kind of has their own agenda. But this really speaks a lot to the importance of combating the stigma individually, locally, in your region, on your campus, also at your state too. The more that we can put a face to the recovery community, the better, in my opinion, because I mean, there's faces of those of us in the newspaper with mugshots, right? Like, there's lots of that being in your face when it comes to substance use disorder and drug use, but we need to put more recovery out there. And I think that when it comes to policies, understanding, you know, what can the recovery agenda do to complement some of these other agendas, right? And so knowing kind of who your audience is, knowing yourself, what your message is, and your goal, you know, what's your ask. All of that combats stigma in a very strategic and intentional way. So yeah, so that's a whole nother webinar, but yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking in my mind, we've got Dylan does one on the business case for collegiate recovery, like getting down to the numbers, the money. The students are there already, might as well support them or else lose the cash from the tuition. And it is, you know, it is political, and it is about putting a face to it. And when you brought up mugshots, I'm like, if you'd have looked at my mugshots, nobody would have thought that I could ever recover, let alone ever go to school. Like,
Right.
so you can't trust, you know, faces say a lot on both sides. So then what should the role, we touched on this earlier a little bit. What should, I love that word, that's a cognitive distortion. What should the role of collegiate recovery be in the recovery movement? And I like this because, you know, it is a community, a CRC or a CRP, and then it's also has this advocacy, anti-stigma component to it. Personally, in my story at FAU, we started off very small, just 3 students, and there was already an AA meeting going on campus. So the community was there in that kind of fellowship, and I took that as a way that I moved more towards the advocacy, because, you know, I already had my home groups and I already had the groups I went to. So I was able to get more involved on the political level and ask those questions. And so that's where the CRC at FAU has gone. We do more around Narcan distribution, trainings, ally trainings, awareness, getting buy-in from other social equity clubs on campus, just challenging these policies and finding answers, not just challenging, just seeing if people know. That was the hardest. To find out about Narcan at the beginning was so hard because nobody'd ever asked. We had to call the police, you know, to find out what their opinion on it was. So, and things are really getting traction lately. Things are getting bigger, but that's because people are asking now. So, what about with you and at Georgia and the communities you've worked with?
Yeah, I mean, so, you know, this really gets me kind of on fire because I think about the role as a student first and foremost, right? So your role as a student is, when you're in college, when you're in higher education, is to receive an education. And part of that education is to question and hold those that are educating you accountable. And so if you think about the culture, the general culture of higher education lately, right, like the past 30 years or so, has not been super healthy. And I would even argue that it's kind of parallel to the banking system in some ways, that there's, all these kind of sparkles and pools and parties and really attractive sort of, shiny things that we chase after as students, right? As people that want this really great education, and we pay a shit ton of money, right? Like we go into debt. We, postpone certain life events because we want to go to school. So they are accountable to us, right? Because we are paying that tuition, and they need us. And we saw that with COVID, right? The enrollment dropped down. They started freaking out, panicking, doing furloughs with staff. And so I think students should feel empowered to speak up if you feel called, if you feel like you're in a safe place in your recovery and you feel like you want to get into advocacy. Feel empowered, get angry and say, look, y'all promised me this experience. If I pay this money and I come here to your campus to receive, so-and-so degree, I want to feel safe. And right now, you're not providing that to me. And I mean, you don't have to start talking about Title IX and safe and drug-free campuses and like all of these policies and actual laws that are tied into your safety. But you can say something is missing and something is wrong, especially if, your campus has experienced any kind of death, overdose, sexual assaults. The dropout rate is really high. I mean, there are these indicators of a really unhealthy campus culture that you can find with some of the data. And I think that's one way that collegiate recovery could be helpful. The larger national conversation is dying for young people. I mean, like begging for young people, for students, for non-traditional students to kind of get into the game, so to speak, and hold policymakers just as accountable as well. And so there's a lot of room for collegiate recovery students to get into it. I would love to see an association of collegiate recovery students someday. I think that that would be very popular among the rest of the national orgs and long overdue. So that's just my opinion, though. It doesn't mean much.
No, you brought up some good points that have come up recently at FAU is like, we are a student organization. We're a club level CRC. We're not a program. We don't have dedicated staff, anything like that. But as a school club, we have more leeway to get away with stuff than staff do. We can say things or push policies or push for events like the Narcan distribution. We ended up being able to do that because we're a club level, because we brought in community or partners. The liability is different for us as students because we are the consumers. But then I forget this personally. I want to check myself is I have to be able to hold space. I'm a very loud and outgoing person, and I don't mind the attention, but it is okay to be a student in recovery. And, in a lot of programs, there's an anonymity component, and I want to hold space for that student too. And sometimes I feel like, a great thing about the CRC being there is that for some students, it's enough that it's just there, even if they're not in it, because they know they're not alone. And that's something that I feel we've been able to accomplish. We don't have a large buy-in of students, but we have a large amount of students that visit our page that can see us we have a presence. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, I'm so glad you did too, Matt, because that's the other piece of this is that I have over the years experienced students that did come forward and it did not work out well for them. And I think that, when I came out of the closet, the first 7 years of my recovery, I was anonymous, and not many people, definitely nobody at work knew because I was a school teacher, and some members of my family knew. But other than that, when I came out, you're all in once you come out, especially at the level of press. If you're going to make this a career, like I'm out there, right? And so now that I have 2 little kids, I'm like, I wonder if there's a way to kind of pull back again, like going behind the curtain of government work. I'll be a little bit more anonymous, but it's definitely something to consider, especially in the career that you're trying to pursue. And We need people in all sectors of society. And so I think the recovery movement and advocacy can happen for sure without being outspoken. There's a lot of different ways to be an advocate. And so I'm really glad that you brought that up.
All right. And I just wanted to end with this quote. I love it. It's from the Harm Reduction Coalition. And it just states that whatever the pathway, it moves us to look through the veils of stigma and criminalization to see the full humanity and potential of people, including ourselves, that society is deemed deviant, dangerous, and disposable. And it just really attacks that stigma right there and saying that, you know, it is a human equity, a human rights kind of thing. So I hope everybody enjoyed the webinar tonight. And I think we're going to open it up now for questions. If there's anything in the question and answer, or
yeah,
you can throw it in the chat.
There's a really great question here. It says, do you ever get tired of advocating, or do the pros always outweigh the cons? And 100% yes, exhausted with advocacy work, and the pros do not always outweigh the cons. And this topic has been coming up a lot lately in some of the conversations and panels I've been a part of. And I really want, if there's anything that you take home from this conversation, I want you just to remember that advocacy is part of my recovery, but advocacy is not my recovery. And I've lost several very close friends in the advocacy world because advocacy became recovery for them. And a couple of them have died. A couple of them have completely burned out and, you know, have had to completely restart different careers. A couple of them have been prosecuted for multiple really kind of, we would say, character defectory stuff in the 12-step community. It just kind of like went rampant. And so balance for the individual who's doing advocacy should be the most important thing, honestly. And taking a step back, I've done that several times over the years. Actually, I'm in the middle of one right now. I just started it yesterday. So this is the last thing I'm doing for a couple weeks before I start the new job. And just, you know, understanding that there's plenty of people that are doing advocacy work, right? Like, the world is not going to crumble if Kristen Harper takes a break for a couple weeks. Like, it'll be fine, right? And just communicating what you need and asking for help, having some really close friends that hold you accountable in a good, supportive way. What do you think, Matt? I'm curious what you think too.
No, I totally agree. There is nothing. When I am angry because I have a shift at the soup kitchen, I know I'm taking on too much. I should not be mad at people when they're hungry. You know, my defects come to the top right away, like self-care and balance. And then remembering, am I doing it with the right motives, or am I doing it because I do like to speak, like stuff like that. So do the pros outweigh the cons for me? Right now they do. You know, but there are days when I come home and it's like, that's that one Wednesday of the month when everything I'm a part of has come together for their meeting. And it's like, no, I hate all of you right now. Leave me alone. And that's why I have dogs, because my recovery, you know, my peer support also comes from canines, I guess. I don't know.
100%. Yeah, that works.
But no, it is very important. It really is. That's all they teach us in social work. Like, for the first 2 years is about self-care and, you know, countertransference. So
yeah. And I see we have a hand up too. Yvette Edwards has their hand up. I'm not sure if you want to put your question in the chat. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Get rid of the stop sharing.
Okay, cool.
Okay, there we go.
I'm really big now. I don't like it. I'm going to change my view. Everybody go in gallery. Here we
go. Who's got their hand up? Hannah?
Yvette Edwards. Oh, I don't. Okay, never mind.
Oh, I can allow you to talk. No? Okay. Talking permitted.
Okay. When I came on back, I just saw my hand was raised. I tried to put it down and I couldn't get it down, so I just leave it.
Well, now you have to ask a question. I'm just kidding. See, that's that pushed into advocacy I was talking
Okay.
about. Thank you.
Okay, I'm in the social worker class first year at Judge Brown. So I'm so interested in harm reduction. I don't have anyone in my family who use substance, but it's like I'm just hooked on this from in the class. So I would like to be an ally too, because I love people. So that's where my help will come in.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yes, you are one. We just made you one.
Sounds like you were one already.
Yes.
Yeah, because I was in the helping as a personal support worker for 10 years. So I'm in the helping stuff already.
Awesome. Thank you, Yvette.
Mhm.
Well, Matt, I know Hannah has just hopped back on, but I just wanted to wish you a happy last couple of weeks of school, because you've been in school for a while, and congratulations. It's a big deal. So, and thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I really enjoyed it.
Me too. It was great. Thank you.
Well, thank you both. I have a feeling that everybody is clapping behind their cameras right now, because this was just a really, really powerful, informative, and just inspiring webinar to hear. I know that some of this information is not new to a lot of people, but to a lot of people it is new. And, you know, I've only been working in this field for about 4 years, and even a lot of this conversation is brand new just within the past couple of years. So I'm just so glad that that you all showed up tonight, and that I hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to go ahead and put a link to literally a 2-question survey just to gauge your what you thought about this webinar. You know, this is something that we offer for our CRLA students every year, and we really do want to continue to improve on the content. So I'm going to put that in the chat. Also, if you're at all interested in the Leadership Academy and you had never heard about it before, or just about Safe Project and some of the work that we're doing around the country, please feel free to hop on our website and reach out to us that way. Thanks everybody for joining.
And I dropped my email in the chat too. If you can always shoot me. If there's a question you wanted to ask that you didn't want everybody to know, you can just shoot me an email, and I'll try to get back to you with the most honest answer I have. And this is Lucy. She was dying to be on camera. She could not help it.